We now need stability and unity, and I will make it my utmost priority to bring our party and our country together.
He was the loser, now he's the Conservatives' next Prime Minister. And in a very, very short address to the country, Rishi Sunak warned we face a profound economic challenge. So what does that mean for you? Rishi Sunak lost the contest over the summer, but has he won the economic argument? We'll talk to those who know him well, those who supported him and those who've campaigned for him. Will the restive Conservative Party be able to unite behind their new leader? Also tonight, a Labour frontbencher gives his response to the third Prime Minister in 2 months. And as Mr Sunak becomes the first British Asian Prime Minister the country's ever had, how much is that a source of pride for the UK?
It's a big achievement for the South Asian population. You know, it shows them that there's chances out there. You can work your way to the top. Don't get me wrong, but for me personally, I don't think colour should matter, should it?
Good evening. The country will tomorrow get its third Conservative Prime Minister in 7 weeks, after a swift Tory leadership contest that lasted just 4 days. And not a vote was cast. In the end, it was a coronation for Rishi Sunak, backed by a majority of Tory MPs. Neither Conservative Party members nor the wider electorate has had any say in him taking over from Liz Truss. And this was the guy Tory members rejected just 2 months ago. In a sign of the extraordinary times in which we live, Mr Sunak said nothing in public about how he would govern and gave no interviews. In a brief statement at around 4 o'clock this afternoon, he warned the country faced profound economic challenges. So what could his premiership mean for you? And what mandate does he have? The list of challenges he faces is daunting, trying to stave off a deep recession, bringing down the backlog in the NHS, strike action, keeping the financial markets reassured that this is a government that can balance the books, which means potentially some tax rises and some public spending cuts. He said in a tweet yesterday he'd deliver on the promise of the 2019 Conservative manifesto. But we're in very, very different economic times to 3 years ago. Here's Nick Watt.
In Parliament for under a decade.
I think you just have to be yourself.
Hello.
But quickly catapulted into the front line and at the heart of the response to the pandemic.
We've had a lot of trying to have your cake and eat it.
Warnings over the summer to his rival about her plans. Vindication, and now a divided party saying, you are our best hope.
A slightly stilted start from a usually polished performer, but no mistaking a key message.
The United Kingdom is a great country, but there is no doubt we face a profound economic challenge.
And then out of Party HQ to face the cameras.
A new leader for an ancient party, a party that used to boast that it was the most successful in the democratic world. Well, that reputation has been frayed in recent years, and it's Rishi Sunak's job to restore that reputation, but that will involve taking tough decisions. Sir Graham Brady.
For the moment, this is a party wanting to unite.
Do you think that Rishi Sunak can sort of heal the often very personal wounds in this party?
Well, based on the evidence we've seen so far, yes. Certainly a very positive, warm reaction from colleagues in Committee Room 14 earlier. And I think a really serious understanding from colleagues as well that we have got to make this work.
Hello, Nick.
How are you?
I'm really well.
And grins from Rishi Sunak's allies.
We've got to now put all the past behind us, unite as a party. The new Prime Minister-to-be addressed the 1922 earlier. He got a hugely warm, overwhelmingly universally warm response. I think he set out that he's got a mission to bring the party together. Unity is going to be absolutely key.
So James, cleverly, Rishi Sunak is going to...
A mood echoed from a senior cabinet minister who switched to Rishi Sunak after Boris Johnson dropped out.
Well, look, Boris chose not to stand. That was his choice, his decision. What we now need to do is make sure we are relentlessly focused on the British people. And so, people will feel bruised, but my message to them, my message to everybody is there's work to do. Let's get on with that.
The largest party here at Westminster used to say that it was good at achieving that status because it had a secret weapon: loyalty. In recent times, it's felt more like an open and blunt instrument: disloyalty. There's a general feeling now in the Conservative Party that they want to put those days behind them, but it will require a monumental effort by all sides.
I mean, he's a comeback kid, right?
A former Tory advisor says unity will need a team effort. The new Prime Minister appointing an inclusive cabinet tomorrow, and MPs rowing in behind that.
Those MPs have got to recognise that they may get overlooked, they may have to look at doing a job they perhaps hadn't thought of doing before, and they've got to play their part. If they genuinely want to see a successful Conservative government, then they've got to concentrate on that. This is actually, the job is about delivering on the last general election, the 2019 manifesto. So actually, they've just all got to recognise they've got to row in the same direction now. Stop all the sniping, stop the noises off, and just crack on.
Will Tanner, you are...
A longer-term challenge to maintain the coalition of traditional Tories and ex-Labour voters, which won Boris Johnson his majority, is doable, according to the man who identified the red wall.
He faces a steep challenge, bringing back those don't knows and convincing those switchers to Labour to come back into the tent. That will require him to pursue, I think, some quite unconventional policies. He will need to tack towards the centre ground on the economy rather than moving right, as Liz Truss did, and he'll need to pursue a socially and culturally conservative agenda on things like crime and immigration. But it is possible.
Acclamation in a party which has lost the habit of acclaiming its leaders. A new chapter or a breathing space before divisions erupt once again.
And Nick is at Downing Street. So what is the mood tonight amongst Conservative MPs?
Well, Victoria, it is a very different atmosphere tonight, even after Rishi Sunak delivered a very blunt message to his troops saying, unite or die. Now, since the Brexit referendum around about 6 years ago, it was never very difficult to find internal critics of whoever happened to be Conservative Prime Minister at the time. Today, there is an overwhelming feeling that this party wants to give Rishi Sunak a chance. I was talking to one member of the cabinet who's not exactly a massive fan of Rishi Sunak, and they said they're relieved that the party now has a leader, that there are signs that many party members, MPs, want to unite behind. And just to give you an idea of the flavour this evening, earlier this afternoon, Rishi Sunak addressed the 1922 committee, and I spoke to somebody who was there, who was a very, very strong Liz Truss supporter, and they said to me that Rishi Sunak's performance was electric. They said he held the room and that he had natural authority. So it's looking like a strong desire to unite. And one thing that will help Rishi Sunak is, I have to say, that many of Boris Johnson's supporters over the last 48 hours, I do have to say they're feeling a little bit sore that he marched them up the hill and then he left them there. It was interesting, during the Conservative conference, Boris Johnson was talking to his supporters and saying, has the party got buyer's remorse yet? Well, it looks like there's quite a few people who've got buyer's remorse about supporting Boris Johnson when they wonder, was he really serious about a contest? Was he expecting a coronation? And obviously that was not going to happen. But a word of warning from somebody who's not on the Rishi Sunak side of things. They're saying that around about 10% of the Conservative Parliamentary Party are either die-hard Boris Johnson or die-hard Liz Truss supporters, and they will need to be appeased. This person said that Rishi Sunak is going to have to, in the first place, reach out to these people, and in the second place, not slip up. And if he manages that over the next few months, then things should be okay. So, Victoria, the change happens around here around about 11:30 tomorrow, and then the first big test for Rishi Sunak, reshuffling his cabinet, and the key thing for him is not to do what Liz Truss did, which was just to put her loyalists and acolytes in to do an inclusive cabinet. Victoria.
Thank you very much, Nick. In a moment, we'll speak to Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. First, let's talk to a man who describes himself as an early Rishi Sunak supporter who spent his summer campaigning for him, Conservative MP Mark Harper. Good evening to you, Mr. Harper.
Victoria.
Who voted for Rishi Sunak?
Well, he had the support of the vast majority of Conservative members of Parliament who they nominated him today, and he was elected unopposed and unchallenged. And he will have the confidence of a majority of members of the House of Commons, which is why he is entitled to hold the post of Prime Minister when His Majesty the King asks him to form a government, which we're expecting to happen tomorrow.
Who voted for him?
Well, that is the way our system works. We have a parliamentary democracy. At the general election in 2019, which Nick referred to several times in that package, Conservative MPs were returned, a majority of Conservative MPs were returned, and he commands the majority support in the House of Commons, and that is the basis on which he's entitled to be Prime Minister, and he will govern and deliver the 2019 manifesto. That's how our system has worked, in exactly the same way Gordon Brown became Prime Minister when Labour was in power.
It's just that some of your own MPs don't think he has a mandate. So Christopher Chope, I think a general election is the only answer. Nadine Dorris agreed with a tweet that suggested this was like a banana republic. Zach Goldsmith says a general election is morally unavoidable.
Well, I don't think they're right. I mean, I think our constitutional system is very clear. You vote for a member of Parliament, so voters, my constituency voted for me, and they want me to exercise my judgment.
Sure.
And that's why Rishi Sunak is entitled to be Prime Minister. And we'll deliver our mandate, which was what we were given by the voters at the 2019 election. And in that package, it was referred to about those promises, and Rishi was clear yesterday that's what he's going to deliver.
That is interesting that you say he will deliver the 2019 manifesto. And that's the reason I ask about a mandate. Yeah. Because today, he said, we face a profound economic challenge. There are suggestions from Bloomberg and others that Jeremy Hunt will stay as Chancellor. He's talked about eye-wateringly difficult decisions. Boris Johnson, who won that 2019 election with an 80-seat majority, said a couple of years ago, we are absolutely not going back to austerity. So I ask again, who voted for what Rishi Sunak talked about today?
Well, look, when you're in government, you have a programme on which you stand and you deliver. But of course, you have to respond to the challenges we face. And look, we didn't have in our 2019 manifesto the fact that it was going to be a global COVID pandemic, and we were going to have to close down the economy, borrow £400 billion to protect millions of jobs and protect thousands of businesses. And we didn't expect a war in Europe waged by Vladimir Putin against Ukraine, which Rishi Sunak has this evening confirmed the solid British government support for the people of Ukraine.
And you might add to that list the disastrous mini budget. So things have changed.
So you do have to, So you obviously
things have changed.
Yeah. So you obviously have to evolve. But the basis on our programme are the promises we made in 2019. So, for example, making sure we level up the country, we make sure we deliver opportunities for people to get on across the whole United Kingdom. It's those sorts of things that we're going to deliver. Good public services, an aspiration to reduce tax over time. But, one thing that was settled over the last few weeks is you have to deliver tax cuts in a sustainable way. That's now a settled argument in the Conservative Party. So we're all on the same page with that. And we need to restore economic stability, which I'm very confident we'll do when we see the medium-term fiscal plan set out next week.
How much harder has the brief Truss premiership made it for Rishi Sunak?
Well, look, I'm going to be very honest. It has made it more difficult because of the way the markets responded. And one of the things that Jeremy Hunt started to do as Chancellor was to restore that economic credibility. One of the reasons I backed Rishi in the summer, one of the things I think is very positive for your viewers to understand is I think the markets will have a lot of confidence in his economic ability. That will mean that we can bear down on inflation more quickly. You'll now have fiscal policy working alongside the Bank of England.
Forgive me, I'm going to pause you
And
there.
that keeps interest rates
There is nothing positive for our viewers, those ones who are paying higher mortgage rates as a result of the Liz Truss mini-budget. What is positive about that?
Interest rates and mortgage rates were going to be rising anyway because we've got...
Not as high as they have done.
No, but let me finish my point. I'm not going to pretend that the response to the mini-budget hasn't been very difficult. I mean, the Prime Minister herself accepted that she'd gone too far and too fast and that had been a problem. So I think in politics, you accept that that hasn't gone well and that's been difficult, and you therefore have to respond to that by putting it right. The Conservative Party has put that right very quickly, by having a new Prime Minister.
That won't help
He'll
people
put a
pay their
new
mortgages.
team together. Well, if you put together a fiscal policy which is working in tune with the Bank of England, a monetary policy, that will bring down inflation more quickly. It will keep interest rates lower than they would otherwise have been, and that absolutely helps your viewers who have to pay their mortgages.
But they've gone up higher, faster than they would have done if it hadn't been for the mini-budget, so say most economic experts. Should Rishi Sunak offer Boris Johnson a job?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to get into deciding who Rishi Sunak puts into his cabinet. That is
it would be unified.
That is a matter for him, and he's made no promises. He himself said yesterday that Boris Johnson has more to offer public life, whether at home or abroad, and I'll wait to see what happens. But those are decisions for the Prime Minister, not for me.
Thank you very much for talking to us on Newsnight.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Mark Harper, a Rishi Sunak supporter. Let's talk to Labour's Wes Streeting. He's the Shadow Health Secretary. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
You are calling for a general election. Do you accept that would be destabilising?
On the contrary, I think that the public deserve a say, not least because, as you were just alluding to there in your questioning to Mark Harper, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng crashed the economy. And difficult choices are now going to have to be made in response, and the public deserve a say. And secondly, expecting this Conservative Party to provide stability, certainty, sound economics and a serious industrial strategy is a bit like asking the arsonist to put out a fire they created. Because
but a general election could cause financial market instability. You must acknowledge that.
I think when you look at what people are saying about Labour's economic policy, about our industrial strategy...
That's not what I asked. I said calling a general election could add to financial market instability. Yes?
Well, on the contrary, I think people will look to a Labour programme with a greater degree of confidence and certainty in terms of what we would provide. I'm talking about the process
of a general election and the destabilising effect.
Well, there are only two possible outcomes of a general election, likely outcomes: a Conservative government, more of the same, or change with Labour, which is now the least riskiest option for the country because of the choices the Conservatives have made, and not just under Liz Truss, but 12 years of economic mismanagement, which has led to a litany of damnation from Conservative MPs who've described their own economic record as one of high taxes and low growth.
But the cost of UK borrowing fell today. The markets were calm. A general election would jeopardise that.
I mean, this is relatively speaking, isn't it? I mean, look at what they've done in terms of market instability.
I'm just giving you the facts from today on the announcement that Rishi Sunak had won.
But sure, let me take you back to what the chairman of Tesco said only the other week. When it comes to a serious plan for growth in Britain, there's only one team on the pitch, which is the Labour Party. Now, Rishi Sunak and his team might say, we've got a plan for the future, but they also have to account for their record, including Rishi Sunak specifically as Chancellor, who fuelled a cost of living crisis and made unfair choices. So on one hand, picking the pockets of working people with higher taxes. On the other hand, explaining why at great length he couldn't go after the excess profits of big oil and gas companies. Apparently, they would struggle. Not millions of people out there who are struggling to pay their bills and now their mortgages, but big oil and gas. How's that a fair or serious or credible choice?
How is it any different from when Tony Blair handed over to Gordon Brown?
We're very different. Firstly, we had a great deal of consistency under New Labour, and what we didn't see...
But there wasn't a general election.
Well, also, Tony Blair hadn't crashed the economy. Gordon Brown hadn't crashed the economy.
But there wasn't a general election.
No, there wasn't. But look, we've had 3 prime ministers in 2 months. I've had boxes of cereal that have lasted longer than Conservative prime ministers.
Sorry, you're allowed to do it once then, but not twice or 3 times. Where are these rules that you're referring to?
There are no rules, and we have an unwritten constitution.
Right, so you're making it up as you go along.
The public are clamouring for a say. They deserve a say, and also they deserve change. And only a Labour government is going to provide a fresh start for Britain. There's a reason we've got 4 Conservatives in the studio this evening. It's not because I'm scary and they need to come along mob-handed to take me on. It's because the Conservative Party is a sclerotic mess.
Okay.
They are chaotic. And who's to say Rishi Sunak isn't going to be out in 6 months' time? Because you can hear the knives sharpening in Westminster of the disgruntled Borisites who once have lit their rooms about his leading them up to the top of the hill and marching them down again. You know, they're going to be baying for Rishi because they still think Rishi knifed Boris Johnson in the back and they're not over it. And we deserve better than this Conservative soap opera we see playing out before our eyes.
Let me ask you finally about a colleague of yours, Nadia Whittome, MP, tweeted earlier, Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister isn't a win for Asian representation.
Well,
I could hear Mark Harper sighing there. She's now deleted it.
She has.
Should she be disciplined?
I think she's done the right thing and deleted it. Let me just put it this way, as I did earlier. Well, I think that's a matter for Kieran. I'm sure it's no coincidence the tweet's been deleted. I'd put it this way. There are children in my constituency this evening who turned on the news to see someone like them about to become our country's Prime Minister. I think that's a wonderful thing. I'll take Rishi Sunak on his record, and we'll take Rishi Sunak on his programme for government. But I think it says something wonderful about this country that someone of British Indian origin could become our Prime Minister. And I think that, in and of itself, regardless of our political differences, is something we should celebrate.
Thank you very much for coming on Newsnight tonight.
Thank you very much.
Nice treating. Thank you. After weeks of turbulence, the markets today reacted calmly to the news that Mr Sunak is to be the new Prime Minister. Government borrowing costs are roughly back down to where they were on the morning of the mini-budget on the 23rd of September. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is due to set out his fiscal statement to Parliament next Monday, assuming, as many believe likely, he remains in post when Mr Sunak unveils his new cabinet tomorrow. What else, apart from the economy, will the new Prime Minister have to deal with? And what do we know about the choices he might make? Here's our chief correspondent, David Grossman.
Rishi Sunak has only been in frontline politics since 2015, taking over William Hague's seat of Richmond in Yorkshire. From the start of his parliamentary career, he has been a fiscal conservative.
Without a prudent approach to borrowing and debt, ordinary people pay the price.
Alex Chalk entered the Commons the same year as Rishi Sunak.
Rishi Sunak, I think, chimes with a lot of things that people think about conservatism. Low tax, for example, smaller state, individual enterprise, freedom, liberty, all those things. But the critical difference is he recognises there are no shortcuts. There's no voodoo economics. A country has to live within its means.
Little did he know that he'd be the Chancellor who borrowed more than any in history.
This is not a time for ideology and orthodoxy. This is a time to be bold. Today, I am making available an initial £330 billion of guarantees, equivalent to 15% of our GDP.
The man who believed there was no such thing as a free lunch would be buying, or at least subsidising, millions of lunches.
Today we introduced the Eat Out to Help Out discount, which will mean that everyone, for the month of August, if they go out for a meal Monday to Wednesday, will receive a 50% discount on that meal, up to £10 a head.
But having spent hundreds of billions on COVID, Rishi Sunak has told his supporters the bills need to be paid.
I think Rishi Sunak is a politician who believes in trade-offs and has been frustrated working under Boris Johnson with his cakeism, and then also frustrated facing Liz Truss as an opponent. If you think back to the leadership contest, he was warning about lots of the things we eventually saw. Liz Truss went further than she even suggested during the contest, but there was a mortgage calculator from the Rishi Sunak campaign saying this is what will happen if interest rates rise. So I think he will try and bring a realism to his government. The question is, does the country and do MPs, are they ready for hard truths?
Yet Rishi went against the advice of his superiors.
As this campaign video shows, Rishi Sunak was an early Brexiteer, the ramifications of which is going to be high on his to-do list as Prime Minister. Former Northern Ireland Secretary Theresa Villas says we shouldn't expect a big change in government policy here.
I believe that, yes, there'll be lots of continuity between Rishi and essentially both his predecessors, Liz and Boris, in terms of they all three of them recognise that the protocol as it stands is not working and we have to change it.
You know, I think he brings a reset. He brings a totally different attitude, which is courtesy, but clarity and firmness. And that's the British way, and that's what I think people want to see, and that's what he'll deliver.
But there are already some on the right of the Conservative Party who are suspicious of Rishi Sunak's commitment to Brexit.
Rishi Sunak has always been someone who, in those subcommittees when he was Chancellor, was warning against action that could spark a trade war. So you can imagine he will want to find a pragmatic solution. How the European Research Group respond to that? I think there are various flare-ups on Brexit that could happen. And it was, as you say, very interesting that during the leadership contest, Rishi Sunak was almost seen as a Remainer remain a candidate. And there are parts of the Tory right that don't rate Rishi Sunak. Yet, really, if you look at his views, he probably is in many ways more right-wing than Boris Johnson.
Rishi Sunak has got to the top knowing when to take a stand and when to keep a low profile. But as others have found out before him in the top job, there are a few important issues that you can sit out. At the best of times, there aren't many easy answers in politics. Rishi Sunak is coming to power at a time when some doubt there are any answers at all, even difficult ones.
Well, the $64 million question for the Conservative Party is, will it unite around Rishi Sunak? It said it would around Liz Truss, and look what happened there. Just yesterday, Boris Johnson pointed out, as he withdrew from the contest, you can't govern effectively unless you have a united party in Parliament. Former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries endorsed a tweet that suggested the installation of Rishi Sunak was reminiscent of a banana republic. Last Thursday, Tory MP Sir Christopher Chope, who wanted Mr Johnson back, told us he wanted a general election. Let's talk now to Conservative MP Sir Peter Bottomley, the longest-serving MP in the Commons, 47 years and counting. And Diana Glover, who is chairman of the London East Area Conservatives, who worked on Liz Truss's leadership campaign. Welcome, both of you. You have been an MP for nearly 5 decades. Can you ever remember a time when your party has been in such a mess?
No, but I can remember the Labour Party getting in such a mess at the end of the 1970s before Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister.
But I'm asking about the Tory party.
I gave you a clear answer and then added something to it, in the same way that you will add something to your questions.
So how bad has it been?
Well, we're having to recover from the difficulty of the consequences of the mini-budget, which weren't fully anticipated by those putting it forward. But as your introduction showed, with interest rates now where they were at the time of the mini-budget, and with the opportunity of easing the recession that's likely to come, trying to keep unemployment down, trying to keep employment up, trying to deal with the labour market squeeze, trying to avoid a price-wage inflation without having a price and incomes policy. Those are challenges which we've been through before, and we know that if people cooperate, it'll work. The first cooperation is within the Tory party, the second is within Parliament, and I suspect that if the Labour Party manage to manage their civil war reasonably well, they'll give basic support to what Rishi Sunak and, assuming it's Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor, want to do. We've got a job to do in Parliament, that's what we're here for.
Yeah. So will the party unite behind Rishi Sunak? And I wonder how much harder Boris Johnson has made those efforts by trying to come back in the way he did after he'd resigned over trust and integrity not that long ago.
The impact of that, I think, will go away quite fast. I don't think he's going to cause trouble.
But he could have just said back Rishi, couldn't he?
He could have just said back Rishi. I wish he had. The other difficulty are the rumours that he's trying to appoint 8 members of the House of Commons to the House of Lords, which mean 8 by-elections, which at the present time we're unlikely to be very successful in. So I hope that those won't go ahead.
Right. Diana, Liz Truss's vision of a low-tax, small-state country has gone. You wanted that, you voted for that. Now you have not had a say in this election, and you're going to get the opposite. How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't think her vision has gone. I think it's been kicked down the road a little bit. And
you think Rishi Sunak is going to deliver that at some point?
Rishi Sunak is on record of saying that he wants low taxes, and I think that that is important for the country. We need to return to being a low tax party.
But his actions in post in previous years would suggest he may say he wants low taxes, but then he puts taxes up.
We've had a very, very difficult time in terms of the fact that, and I think that this has possibly been some of the problems for our party, is that in response to coronavirus, we instituted a very severe lockdown that, as Mark alluded to, has cost us almost £400 billion, and we're paying for that. And had we have not had such strict lockdowns, dare I say it, perhaps Boris might still be in post.
Are you comfortable with the fact that you didn't get a say this time?
No, I'm not. And I think that the party should have had a say. I think that, unfortunately, the 1922 committee set the bar too high, but then we are in hindsight, and we must also remember that one of the three candidates did actually get the required number of MPs and then chose not to go forward. But I think it would have probably poured oil over the bruised party had we have been able to have a members' vote. But I still sort of understand that we need to be swift for the sake of the country. We need to get a Prime Minister in place so that they can focus, so that we can work towards a common goal.
So despite being a bit disappointed that you didn't get a say, you are going to unite behind Rishi Sunak?
Yes.
Right,
yes.
Even though less than 2 weeks ago you tweeted, well, it didn't take Tory backbench MPs long to punish us, the members, for not choosing their choice of PM. How very dare we? They don't want us to have a say again. Perhaps we won't be there when they need our support.
Yes, I think that Liz was perhaps undermined. I think her vision for what the country should be is not very different from Rishi's vision. But we have to now move forward for the sake of the country.
I mean, they had very different visions in the summer, didn't they? Sir Peter Bottomley, if you look at the opinion polls, Labour is way ahead, as you know. They could win the next general election. Is there any part of you that thinks, you know what, after 12 years in government, perhaps we need a period in opposition so we can refocus?
No, I don't. And I think that what we saw with the crisis over the mini-budget was in effect what would have happened if Labour had won the 2019 election.
Eh?
Well, they were going forward with a policy which would have led a great big gap between government income and government spending. That would have shaken the market, that would have put interest rates up, that would have caused unemployment. We all know, it's an easy thing to say that every Labour government is left with more unemployment. What I do think we ought to do is to move forward and say, can we work with the civil service, can we work with the country, and can we realise that the reason to unite the Tory party is not because it's good for the Tory party, though it will be, it's good for the country. We have the responsibility of being in government. We can do it better than other people. If a policy we put forward are right, the opposite of right is wrong and left, so let's leave the left behind and do what's right.
Let's see what happens. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Sir Peter Bottomley and Diana Glover. Thank you for coming on Newsnight. It's obviously a really busy week in Westminster, but after so much tumult, how are the people of the country feeling? All this week, Newsnight is in Burnley. It's a constituency that turned Conservative in 2019 for the first time in over 100 years. No voter in Burnley or anywhere else for that matter had any say in Rishi Sunak becoming our latest PM. Our UK editor, Seema Katecha, took the temperature.
Last night, the night before, at about 1 o'clock this morning.
It's short at the back and sides for Marley. Here at Park Lane Barbers, Rishi Sunak's win, and specifically his race, isn't really mega news.
It doesn't bother me. He could be green, purple or yellow. I'm not concerned, as long as he's doing a good job. He's not doing it for any money. He's already got loads of money, so he's just doing it because he likes people.
And what do you want from him?
Honesty.
Tell me a bit more about that.
I just hope he does a good job. I hope he doesn't plan to avoid any major questions and things like that.
And for James, the price of petrol is playing on his mind.
Cost of living, the only thing that really affects me is the fuel side of things, trying to run a business. It costs me about £1,000 a month just to run my truck, which obviously it comes into your costs. You've got to put your prices up, which then affects customers. That's the only thing that really affects me. I'm very optimistic, I'm positive about everything, but honestly, government and parliament, I've no interest whatsoever. I just think they're a load of squabbling kids, and you need someone really in charge, really, that knows what's actually going on. I'm not saying they're dumb, but they're not in touch with reality one bit.
In 2019, Burnley elected its first Conservative MP for 109 years. Its industrial past helped make it a Labour stronghold, but then party loyalties were shattered as many switched to Tory after Brexit. Rishi Sunak will want to hold on to seats like this that have a small majority and aren't traditionally blue.
It's a big achievement for the South Asian population. You know, it shows them there's chances out there. You can work your way to the top. Don't get me wrong, but For me personally, I don't think colour should matter, should it?
Rishi Sunak said there's no doubt we face a profound economic challenge, something Ati is already feeling.
Gas, electric, all the essentials going up, fuel going up. Like for example, myself, it's gone up a third, my bills, from gas, electric, and so you've got to find that elsewhere. And you're trying not to put that onto the clients. Touch wood, it's not as cold as what it usually is in October, but as it gets colder, I think the elderly will struggle a lot, especially who live on their own and no support and no help. So I think they need to start thinking about people, the general public, rather than the higher level.
The country sees its third Prime Minister in 7 weeks as people continue to feel the pain of the economic crisis.
At 42, Rishi Sunak is the youngest Prime Minister in more than 2 centuries. His mum ran a chemist in Southampton. His dad was a GP. They saved money to send him to Winchester College, an independent boarding school. He is very, very rich after marrying Akshata Murphy, the daughter of a billionaire. What accounts for his swift rise to the top job? How much of a source of pride is it that he becomes the first British Asian Prime Minister? Let's talk to Conservative peer Lord Poppet, who knows Mr Sunak well, and from Labour, Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, former Shadow Attorney General for England and Wales. Welcome, both of you. Lord Poppet, you have worked very hard to get more British Asians into politics. You've worked hard to help Rishi Sunak become Prime Minister. How proud are you tonight?
Well, I think it's a very exciting time to see a British Asian becoming Prime Minister of this country. There's a large number of young, new generation, British-born, highly educated, very patriotic about this country, well integrated, who are making career in politics and making career in the City of London.
How significant do you think this is, Baroness Chakrabarti, for diversity?
Well, I think it would be grudging of me not to suggest that it is a moment for the country if it has its first non-white Prime Minister. But I would agree with some of your bystanders in Burnley who understand the symbolism, but symbolism is not enough. And what they also want is somebody who cares for everybody in society, Tory and people who don't vote Tory, people who haven't had a chance to vote for this Prime Minister yet. He should seek a mandate, but they need to pay the bills. And they need, you know, and I'm not having a go at Rishi Sunak for being mega wealthy, but he's going to have to work very, very hard to demonstrate an empathy with people who are really, really struggling.
And you're nodding in agreement there, Lord Poppet.
Yes, he's got to work very hard. Rishi, the advantage of Rishi is a great technocrat as well as a politician. He's got the best of both. And the crisis we're going through as a country is something he's got to address. And I'm sure he's probably one of the best person in the Conservative Party to address those crises.
Well, he was the Chancellor in the Johnson years and in the COVID years. And I remember being in the Lords with Lord Poppet when Lord Agnew, only in January of this year, resigned at the dispatch box because he felt the Treasury had not taken billions of pounds of COVID fraud seriously. About 1,000 companies that got loans from the Treasury didn't even exist, weren't even in business at the beginning of COVID. So there is this sense that some people have done very, very well in recent years, and other people, nurses included, are living off food banks, and even the food banks are running out of resources.
Lord Poppet, can I ask you, Baroness Chakrabarti suggests it's not only about Rishi Sunak being a British Asian Prime Minister, it will be about how he treats other minorities. Is that fair?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, he is a good example to other minority. What the minority or people of ethnic minority like about Rishi becoming Prime Minister is a diversity in how far this country has gone when it comes to diversity. It's something to celebrate. And Rishi is a good role model. It gives them, it inspires them to go and make a success as well in whatever field they are.
But you have to treat others as you've been treated. And I'm sure that Mr Sunak's family are very proud of what they've done as migrants. You know, my parents were migrants to this country in the late 50s as well. But now we have a politics in parts of the Tory party where people are picking and choosing between good and bad migrants. And some people are to be celebrated and some people are to be put on planes to Rwanda. And that picking and choosing is very divisive. And my biggest fear, I have to say at this moment, is that if as Nick Watt said in his earlier report, Rishi Sunak has to reach out to this 10% of very right-wing, awkward squad people in his party. He mustn't placate them by more of the culture wars that we have seen of late.
Well, controlling immigration was one of the reasons people voted for Brexit. Controlling immigration was one of the reasons the Conservatives, you could argue, won their 2019 election with an 80-seat majority.
But you can control immigration fairly by operating due process and not ripping up the Refugee Convention, ripping up the ECHR and saying these migrants from Hong Kong are good and these desperate refugees from another part of the world are bad. That is not the rule of law.
I think there's a difference between Hong Kong immigrants and the immigrants we're getting now through that boat coming into this country very illegally. It's costing a fortune to us. The hard-working taxpayers are paying for it. So we've come with a scheme where they go back to Rwanda, who will be looked after very well. Had there been legal migrants, we have no problem. We'll process like Ukrainians coming to our country. We have a fantastic record as a country, including myself coming into this country, her parents as well, as migrants. And this country has treated them very, very well.
Well, were you a good refugee? Is that why? I mean, you were 17, I think. You came from Uganda. You know, in terms...
How is a Ugandan refugee different from an Afghan refugee or a Ukrainian refugee or any other kind of refugee? You have to deal with people's claims.
We have no problem. We were taking 15,000 Afghanistan. We're taking 50,000 Ukrainians now. The refugees she's talking that's going to go back to Rwanda, the illegal refugees coming through a dangerous route in this country.
Well, do you accept that there are illegal migrants and legal migrants?
So somebody who is a genuine refugee is not illegal because we have something called the Refugee Convention that was promoted by Winston Churchill. You process people's claims and then you determine, then you determine who is a genuine refugee. You don't palm off your responsibilities on Rwanda or anywhere else.
Let me ask you finally, Baroness Chakrabarti, about Nadia Whittome, Labour MP, who tweeted earlier, Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister isn't a win for Asian representation. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I believe that tweet was deleted, and I didn't see it. I mean,
that's what she wrote.
It depends what the second. This is why I'm not on Twitter, because it depends what the second sentence would have been. If the second sentence would have been until he promises to honour the Refugee Convention, or if he's still threatening to rip up the Human Rights Act, then I would agree with her. So it's not just who you are; it's what you stand for, and I think that's something that we all need to think about.
Okay. Thank you both very much. Thank you for coming on the programme. Thank you. That's all from us tonight. I'm back tomorrow in a few moments. Details of a second Newsnight special tomorrow. Kirsty can explain. For now, have a good evening.
Newsnight is here in Taipei, the capital of Taiwan. Xi Jinping has just restated his claim to the sovereignty of these islands. So how does this vibrant democracy react to the certainty of his ambition and the uncertainty of if, how and where China will move? And what will be the world's response? I'll be joined by politicians, military experts, tech giants and young Taiwanese creatives to discuss how the world looks from here, 100 miles from the coast of China. That's Newsnight Global from Taiwan.